So, do I really need to quit drinking coffee? This is a question that comes up for people who work with people like me. And there's no fixed answer, but if you're asking yourself that question and you suspect that the answer is probably yes for you, then the answer is probably yes for you. And on the other hand, if you are outraged that somebody would ask such a question of you, and you get really defensive, then also there's a good chance that the answer is yes for you. Um, what I tell people frequently is that, our body has the equivalent of a savings account, right? The deep reserves of energy, which East Asian medicine talks about in terms of the kidney organ system. That's not a one-to-one correlation with the Western anatomical kidney. It has just as much to do with the adrenals and kind of deep bodily reserves that, um, yeah, it's not a one-to-one correlation, but understand the kidneys in this context as like the bank. It's the deep reserves. And day to day, we have a kind of a checking account, which is replenished by sleep and breathing air and eating good food. And we kind of, um, when we don't, when for whatever reason our checking account gets low, like we haven't been sleeping enough, it's very easy and tempting to want to draw a little bit from savings. And that's exactly what caffeine does. It helps pull energy out of our reserves. It gives our system the illusion that we have more energy at our disposal. And it does give us more energy, but at a cost, right? Um, some people happen to have very deep pockets, as it were, and can live a whole long, healthy life without ever um, being overly taxed in that regard. Other people are on the other end of the spectrum. So it really varies. But if you're experiencing chronic fatigue and caffeine is all that's propping you up, you're probably never going to be able to get out of the cycle without going through a complete withdrawal of all caffeine. Um, it's just unfortunately the way it is for a lot of people. Doesn't mean you have to go cold turkey. You can taper it off, but until you stop kind of goosing your adrenals in that way, and it's like you're kicking a dead horse at a certain point. And if you want to give that horse a new lease on life, you have to give it a chance to rest deeply and recover. Um, yeah, caffeine is definitely a drug. It's one that our society, of course, encourages because it lends itself towards productivity, but not necessarily in a way that's in everybody's best interest all the time. Um, yeah, yeah. There's more that could be said, of course. Um, Coffee and tea, obviously both caffeinated, talking about, Camellia sinensis tea. Um, Both caffeinated, but not really the same in terms of the experience that they engender. Um, Good quality tea, at least, should be a much smoother ride than coffee. So if part of your issue, so I guess another category of people who should be careful with coffee are people who are just anxious and stressed. People who are in that boat often think that coffee is part of the answer because it makes you more productive, you feel more on. But after drinking a cup of coffee, people don't realize how stressed it makes them feel, how tightly wound up. It's like you have all of a sudden you have all this energy coursing through your system, but you're also tend to be pretty tight, so it can't course through freely. Um, so it can lend itself to a lot of stress and tension and anxiety. People tend to not be as fun to be around when they've had a little too much coffee, right? So tea doesn't tend to do that to the same extent. Um, but if you're having trouble sleeping or you're depleted, then you still don't want to drink black or green tea. Even pu'er tea, which has its own therapeutic effects in a certain respect and has lower caffeine, is still a stimulant. Um, yeah, but I do remind people who are struggling with stress that drinking a cup of coffee is like it's kind of like drinking a cup of stress, honestly. People at a certain point are doing it out of force of habit or because of office culture, or they think it's what they need. But there's so many things that you could be drinking that would make you feel so much better. I'm talking about legal things, ideally custom tailored herbal formulas that are going to meet your physiology exactly where it's at and help it to be in balance so that you have more genuine um, energy and, yeah, are not just whipping yourself up into a frenzy with no place for the energy to go. Um, yeah, so those are some thoughts on caffeine.